In January 1985, a violent incident occurred at the Crossroads Diner in Detroit's Corktown district. The victims were identified as Ezra Cross, 48, a former chemistry professor at Wayne County Community College, and his son Finn Cross, 16, a junior at Corktown Technical High School. According to the police report filed by Detective Robert Morrison of Detroit PD's Homicide Division, 5 unidentified male suspects entered the establishment at closing time. Security camera footage from the adjacent Murphy's Pharmacy showed the perpetrators arriving in 2 vehicles, a black 1984 Lincoln Continental and a dark blue Cadillac Fleetwood, both bearing temporary license plates. This evidence later proved crucial in establishing the premeditated nature of the attack. Witness Abigail Cross, 45, wife and mother of the victims, provided a detailed statement from her position in the diner's storage room. Through a gap in the wooden door, she observed the assailants, describing them as wearing expensive. The suspects were identified as members of the Carmagnola crime organization, a prominent criminal enterprise controlling various illegal activities in Detroit's Southwest District since 1979. Mrs. Cross's testimony indicated that the attackers displayed professional demeanor and methodology consistent with organized crime operations. The medical examiner's report, authored by Dr. Thomas Wright, documented that both victims suffered extensive blunt force trauma. Ezra Cross sustained 17 distinct impact wounds to his head and torso, while Finn Cross received 12 similar injuries. The cause of death was listed as severe cranial trauma, resulting from repeated impacts against the concrete sidewalk covered with snow. The medical examination revealed defensive wounds on both victims' hands and forearms, indicating they had attempted to protect themselves during the assault. The Detroit Police Department's investigation revealed a pattern of systematic extortion in the area. Business records seized from the Cross family residence indicated that Ezra Cross had recently refused to pay a monthly protection fee of $2,000 to an unnamed organization. This decision coincided with a significant decrease in the diner's revenue, documented in their financial statements for the 4th quarter of 1984. Further investigation revealed that several other businesses in the area were subject to similar extortion demands, with payment amounts varying based on the establishment's perceived profitability. Historical crime data compiled by the DPD's Organized Crime Division showed that between 1980 and 1985, 3 families who provided testimony against the Carmagnola organization disappeared without trace. The Sullivans, March 1980, the Petrovs, November 1982, and the Hendersons, April 1984. Despite extensive investigations, no bodies were ever recovered, and the cases remain unsolved in the department's cold case files. Initial witness canvassing by officers James Rodriguez and Michael Wilson yielded minimal cooperation from local residents and business owners. The incident report noted significant reluctance among potential witnesses to provide formal statements. This behavior was consistent with documented patterns of witness intimidation in cases involving organized crime in the Detroit metropolitan area during the 1980s. Several potential witnesses initially agreed to provide statements but later recanted, citing concerns for their personal safety and that of their families. The crime scene, processed by forensics team leader Kenneth Walsh, yielded minimal physical evidence due to weather conditions. Blood spatter analysis conducted by specialist Lisa Monroe indicated that the assault lasted approximately 18 minutes, with the victims being moved multiple times during the attack. The snow-covered sidewalk at the scene was recorded as showing a distinctive crimson discoloration extending from the diner's main entrance. Forensic analysis of the crime scene revealed that the perpetrators had carefully avoided leaving fingerprints or other traceable evidence, suggesting professional criminal experience. In the weeks following the Cross family murders, the Detroit Police Department's investigation encountered significant obstacles due to widespread witness intimidation. The pattern of witness behavior revealed a community paralyzed by fear, with key testimonies being altered or retracted under suspicious circumstances. Horace Woodworth, proprietor of Woodworth's Antiques and Collectibles, initially provided a detailed witness statement to Detective Morrison. As an astronomy enthusiast with an extensive telescope collection, Woodworth's second-floor workshop offered an unobstructed view of the crime scene. His initial testimony described 5 men in expensive overcoats assaulting the victims. However, 7 days after the murders, 2 men matching the description of the attackers visited his shop. Following this encounter, Woodworth requested a second interview with the police, during which he dramatically altered his testimony, claiming poor visibility and failing memory. The forensics team noted that Woodworth's workshop contained 3 high-powered telescopes positioned toward the street. The initial police report documented that one Celestron C14 telescope was perfectly aligned with the location of the murders. Despite this physical evidence, Woodworth maintained his revised statement, exhibiting visible signs of distress during subsequent questioning. Officers observed his hands trembling and noted excessive perspiration during the second interview. The Ramirez family, residing in the apartment directly above the crime scene, presented another crucial example of witness intimidation. The family of 6, who had immigrated from Mexico 5 years prior, initially agreed to provide statements to the police. Diego Ramirez, 19, the eldest son, had a clear view of the entire incident from their third-floor window. However, the family's cooperation abruptly ceased after they received an unexpected visit from building inspectors wearing expensive overcoats. A private conversation between Diego Ramirez and Abigail Cross, recorded in Mrs. Cross's witness statement, revealed the family's predicament. "We wanted to help. Truly, we did. But I have 3 younger siblings. I saw what they did to Finn." The day following this conversation, the Ramirez family installed heavy curtains on all their windows and submitted a formal retraction of their initial statement to the police. Beatrice Stern, owner of Stern's flower shop located opposite the diner, modified her testimony in a similar pattern. Her husband, Marcus Stern, had died 3 months earlier in what was officially ruled an accident, a fall down the basement stairs of their shop. Investigation records revealed that Marcus Stern had refused to pay protection money to local criminals 2 weeks before his death. Despite the suspicious timing, the case was closed due to lack of evidence. Mrs. Stern's initial police statement described hearing violent altercations and multiple impacts on the night of the Cross murders. However, after receiving numerous flower deliveries from anonymous admirers, she amended her statement, claiming she had merely heard what she assumed were stray cats fighting. The investigating officers noted her reluctance to make eye contact during the second interview. The Detroit Police Department's Internal Affairs Division launched a covert investigation into potential police corruption after several officers involved in the case displayed unusual behavior. Detective James Porter, who took Mrs. Stern's second statement, was observed avoiding eye contact with Abigail Cross during subsequent interviews. His case notes were found to be unusually sparse compared to his previous work, raising concerns about possible interference with the investigation. Local business records from the period revealed a pattern of similar behavior among other potential witnesses. The owner of Murphy's Pharmacy, whose security cameras captured the perpetrator's vehicles, reported a break-in the day after providing the footage to police. Though nothing was stolen, all security equipment was destroyed, and the incident was followed by the pharmacy's immediate enrollment in a local business protection program. The emptiness of the Crossroads Diner gradually filled with new patrons. Abigail Cross transformed the site of tragedy into the heart of neighborhood life, serving the best coffee and freshest pies in Corktown. During daylight hours, she played the role of gracious hostess, patiently listening to the endless justifications of her former neighbors. "You must understand, Abigail. I have 3 children," Mrs. O'Brien would say, avoiding eye contact. "Nothing can be done against them. They're everywhere," Mr. Johnson would whisper, nervously stirring his coffee. "The police won't protect us," Mrs. Rodriguez would sigh, hurriedly finishing her blueberry pie. Abigail would nod, refill coffee cups, and smile. At night, she descended into Ezra's basement laboratory. Here, among flasks and test tubes, her second life began. The yellowed pages of ancient toxicology tomes revealed their secrets to a patient student. Medieval alchemists' works sat alongside modern organic chemistry research. Abigail studied with the same methodical precision she once applied to the diner's accounting books. Her job as a cleaning woman at the university library provided access to scientific journals and rare editions. In the silence of empty halls, she studied the latest advances in forensic medicine, particularly interested in new methods of toxin detection in tissues. Each article read led to formula refinements, dosage adjustments, and preparation method modifications. She mastered the art of slow poison, substances that accumulate in the body over years, causing symptoms indistinguishable from natural illnesses. She studied compounds that left no traces in standard toxicology screenings. She learned to work with substances whose presence in the body became undetectable after a specific time. New herbs appeared in her kitchen, harmless-looking plants whose properties were described in ancient grimoires. She grew them in a small winter garden set up in the former storage room. Patrons often praised the unusual aroma of her signature tea, attributing their slight dizziness to fatigue and stress. Gradually, regular patrons of her diner began to notice that members of the notorious Carmagnola family increasingly complained of strange symptoms. Some developed inexplicable weakness. Others suffered from persistent headaches, while others were tormented by joint pain. Doctors were baffled. All tests came back normal, yet the patient's conditions steadily deteriorated. Abigail continued to brew coffee, bake pies, and smile at her customers. The neighborhood slowly grew accustomed to news of mysterious illnesses afflicting members of the criminal family. Some attributed it to divine punishment, others to professional stress. Only Diego Ramirez would sometimes thoughtfully stare at his coffee cup, remembering the chemistry lessons once taught by Professor Cross. In her basement laboratory, surrounded by Ezra's old equipment, she felt closest to her lost family. The gentle bubbling of solutions and the soft clink of glassware became her lullaby, while complex chemical equations danced through her dreams like vengeful spirits. The line between justice and revenge blurred with each carefully measured dose, with each precisely timed serving. The impact of her work manifested in subtle ways throughout the criminal organization. Young enforcers found themselves too weak to intimidate shopkeepers. Collection rates dropped as key members called in sick more frequently. The iron grip of the Carmagnola family began to rust from within, corroded by invisible agents that left no evidence behind. Horace Woodworth became her first subject. His telescope had been perfectly aligned with the murder scene that night, a fact that haunted Abigail's dreams. Now he came faithfully each morning for his special tea blend. Digitalis purpurea, foxglove, dead man's bells, a beautiful plant with purple flowers that concealed a deadly secret. 3 years of gradual cardiac muscle deterioration. When they found him slumped over a Victorian writing desk in his antique shop, everyone nodded knowingly. His father had also died of heart failure. Genetics, they said. Natural causes. Beatrice Stern developed a particular fondness for the new herbal salad, a house specialty featuring rare mushrooms that Abigail claimed to cultivate herself. 5 years passed before her liver began to fail inexplicably. The doctors were baffled by the progressive deterioration that defied conventional diagnosis. "It's so strange," the neighbors whispered at her funeral. "She was always so health-conscious." No one connected the weekly salads to her decline. The Ramirez family's dissolution occurred with glacial precision. Diego, the eldest, was the first to experience unexplained chronic pain. His brothers followed with mysterious kidney problems that appeared years apart to avoid suspicion. Must be genetic, the medical community concluded, after exhaustive tests revealed no clear cause. The family that had watched from their window, choosing silence over justice, slowly disappeared from the neighborhood, one funeral at a time. Over 18 years, Abigail methodically poisoned every witness who had chosen silence that night. She knew their habits, their favorite dishes, their small indulgences. Each received a personalized recipe of retribution, crafted in her basement laboratory with the same attention to detail that Ezra had once applied to his chemistry lectures. The O'Brien family's morning coffee ritual became their undoing. Mrs. O'Brien, who had 3 children to protect, now watched them grow weaker year by year. The doctors called it chronic fatigue syndrome, unable to identify the true cause of their perpetual exhaustion. Mr. Johnson's beloved afternoon pastries carried microscopic doses of metals that accumulated in his brain, leading to what everyone assumed was early-onset dementia. She maintained detailed records in a leather-bound notebook, tracking doses and effects with scientific precision. Each entry was a testament to her patience and methodology. The symptoms she induced were subtle, appearing natural and unconnected. A slight tremor here, unexplained fatigue there, gradual organ failure that mimicked genetic predisposition or environmental factors. The members of the Carmagnola organization received special attention. Their protection racket continued, But their enforcers increasingly fell victim to mysterious ailments. Young thugs developed tremors that made holding weapons difficult. Collection managers suffered from chronic migraines that medical specialists couldn't explain. The family's grip on the neighborhood weakened as their soldiers succumbed one by one to invisible enemies. The police never connected the dots. How could they? The deaths were too far apart, too different in nature, too natural in appearance. Detective Morrison, who had investigated the Cross murders, occasionally stopped by for coffee, unaware that he was sitting across from the architect of the neighborhood's longest-running unsolved mystery. Detective Rain Keller didn't believe in coincidences. Young and ambitious, she joined the precinct 15 years after the Cross murders and began noticing unusual patterns that her colleagues had overlooked. The deaths shared subtle commonalities. All victims lived within a 2-block radius of the Crossroads Diner and were regular customers. When she pulled the 1985 case file from the archives, pieces of a darker puzzle began falling into place. Studying vintage building plans from the Detroit Historical Society, she meticulously mapped every apartment and business with a direct view of the crime scene. The pattern that emerged was chilling. The list of mysterious illness victims aligned perfectly with these locations. Her investigation revealed an even more disturbing detail. Each deceased person had been listed in the original police reports as a potential witness, only to later recant their statements. Rain spent countless nights in the precinct's evidence room, surrounded by yellowing case files and crime scene photographs. She created a detailed timeline, noting how the deaths were spaced years apart, making them appear unconnected. The causes seemed natural: heart failure, liver disease, kidney problems, progressive neurological conditions. But the statistical improbability of so many witnesses succumbing to various ailments nagged at her investigative instincts. The breakthrough came when she discovered Dr. Thomas Wright's original autopsy reports. The medical examiner had noted trace amounts of various toxins in several victims, but dismissed them as environmental exposure. However, when Rain compiled the data, a pattern emerged. Each victim showed evidence of long-term poisoning with different substances, carefully administered to mimic natural diseases. She began surveillance of the Crossroads Diner, watching the daily routine of Abigail Cross. The widow's transformation from victim to neighborhood fixture intrigued her. Rain observed how Abigail remembered every customer's preferences, how she maintained detailed records of their visits, how she prepared special blends and dishes with methodical precision. The detective's research led her to Professor Cross's academic background. His specialty had been organic chemistry, with a focus on natural compounds and their effects on biological systems. The university's records showed that his home laboratory had been fully equipped for complex chemical analysis and synthesis. Rain wondered if those same tools, in the hands of a grieving widow, could have become instruments of methodical revenge. Further investigation revealed that the basement of the Cross residence had never been properly searched during the original murder investigation. The detective's request for a warrant was met with resistance from her superiors, who saw no reason to disturb an elderly widow based on circumstantial evidence. "You're chasing ghosts," they told her. But Rain couldn't shake the feeling that she was actually chasing something far more tangible and deadly. She began interviewing surviving neighbors, piecing together the changes in the neighborhood over the past 2 decades. Many spoke of Abigail with affection, praising her strength and resilience. Yet there was something in their eyes when they mentioned her. A flicker of unease, a shadow of unspoken knowledge. Some refused to eat at the diner despite praising its food, making excuses about dietary restrictions or changed habits. Rain's investigation file grew thicker with each passing week. She documented every suspicious death, every recanted testimony, every unexplained illness. The pattern was clear to her now, a spiral of delayed justice radiating outward from the Crossroads Diner. But proving it would be another matter entirely. How do you demonstrate that deaths spanning 20 years, all appearing natural, were actually carefully orchestrated acts of revenge? Yet with each new piece of evidence she uncovered, Rain felt her professional certainty wavering. The witnesses who died had chosen silence in the face of brutal murder. The Carmagnola family's grip on the neighborhood had been broken not by law enforcement, but by a series of mysterious illnesses that decimated their ranks. Was this justice of a different kind? And if it was, what was her duty as a detective when faced with such a perfect crime? On the day of her arrest, Abigail stood behind the counter as usual. Fresh coffee steamed in cups set out for the officers. "You're 18 years too late," she told Detective Keller, her voice carrying neither fear nor remorse. With steady hands, she reached beneath the counter and retrieved a weathered notebook, a meticulous diary containing dates, dosages, and symptoms. Each page documented a story of vengeance, written with the precision of a recipe book. The arrest was conducted quietly, without disrupting the morning routine of the diner. Regular customers watched in stunned silence as Abigail Cross, the neighborhood's beloved widow, was led away in handcuffs. Her composure never wavered. She locked the diner's door one final time with the same methodical care she had applied to measuring toxins for nearly 2 decades. The evidence was overwhelming once collected. Her basement laboratory, untouched since Ezra's death, yielded a treasure trove of botanical specimens and chemical compounds. Each substance corresponded to entries in her diary, creating an undeniable map of systematic elimination. The precision of her documentation rivaled any police investigation. Times, dates, doses, observed effects, all recorded with scientific detachment. The trial became a sensation, drawing national attention to the quiet tragedy that had unfolded in Corktown. Forensic experts testified about the sophistication of her methods, noting how each poison had been carefully chosen to match the victim's presumed medical predispositions. The prosecution painted a picture of calculated malice, while the defense spoke of a justice system that had failed to protect its citizens. Abigail sat through the proceedings with the same quiet dignity she had maintained behind her diner counter. She listened impassively as former customers testified about specialty teas and custom salads, about gradual illnesses and mysterious symptoms. The medical examiner, who had missed the patterns for years, now detailed how she had engineered deaths that mimicked natural causes with devastating accuracy. During cross-examination, she answered questions with unsettling candor. Yes, she had poisoned them all. Yes, she had watched them die slowly, just as they had watched her family die that snowy night. No, she felt no remorse. Her testimony was delivered with the same careful attention to detail that characterized her diary entries. Detective Keller, testifying about the investigation that finally unveiled the truth, spoke of the statistical improbability that had first drawn her attention. She described the pattern of deaths radiating outward from the Crossroads diner, each one connected to the witnesses who had chosen silence over justice in 1985. When offered the chance to make a final statement, Abigail declined. The courtroom waited in tense silence, expecting some declaration of remorse or justification. It was only as she was being led away to her cell that she turned to face the jury. "They watched my family's murder through their windows. I made them watch their own deaths approach through the windows of their souls. Fear made them silent then. Now you know what fear made of me." The sentence was life imprisonment without possibility of parole. As she was led from the courtroom, several jurors noticed that her hands, the same hands that had served countless poisoned meals, remained perfectly steady. The local paper's headline the next day read, "Crossroads, Widow's Revenge, a 18-year recipe for justice." In the years that followed, criminologists studied her case as an example of the most methodical revenge-killing spree in history. Her diary became required reading in forensic toxicology courses, teaching future investigators what signs to watch for. The basement laboratory was preserved as evidence, its shelves still lined with innocent-looking herbs that had delivered silent death for almost 2 decades. Detective Keller visited her once in prison, seeking answers to the questions that still haunted her. Abigail spoke freely about her methods, her choices, the careful planning that went into each death. When asked if she ever considered stopping, she smiled the same gentle smile that had disarmed her victims for years. "Every poison has its course, detective. Once administered, it must run to its natural conclusion." The Crossroads diner stood empty, its windows dark, its counter collecting dust. But in Corktown, people still spoke in whispers about Abigail Cross and her terrible patience. They remembered her kindness, her quiet strength, and the gentle way she had served death with coffee and pie. Some called her a monster, others a tragic figure of justice perverted by grief. But all agreed on one thing. She had transformed her husband's science of life into an art of death, and in doing so, had written her own dark chapter in Detroit's history.